Hello everyone. Have a nice evening. Enjoy a good ghost story with the gentle sound of rain from BLACKRIDGE Stories, and sleep well. If you find these stories interesting, please subscribe and comment for me. Thank you very much everyone, and now, without keeping you waiting any longer, let's go to part one of the story. The Spirits Beneath the Moonlight. Ghosts of Taos, the desert town of Taos, New Mexico, wears its history like an old, weathered cloak. Underneath the scenic beauty of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains and the charm of adobe architecture lies a past drenched in sorrow, war, and blood. For centuries, this land has been home to the Taos Pueblo people, indigenous inhabitants whose connection to the earth is spiritual and deep-rooted. But when the drums of war beat through these hills, they left behind not just scars, but spirits. It was just past twilight when Michael Turner, a historical journalist from Albuquerque, arrived in Taos. He wasn't here for art galleries or adobe tours. He was chasing whispers, tales passed down over generations, of voices in the wind and shadows that moved where light should be. Stories of the lost souls of native warriors, bound forever to the place of their final stand. Michael had heard of the Taos hum, a mysterious, low-frequency sound that many claimed to hear at night. An unexplained phenomenon. Some said it was mechanical. Others believed it was supernatural. The drumming of spirits beneath the desert floor. He intended to find out for himself. That night, he checked into a small bed and breakfast near the Taos Pueblo. The owner, an elderly woman named Clara Montoya, gave him a thin smile as he mentioned his purpose. Her hands froze mid-motion. "If you're going near the old battlefield," she warned, "be respectful. They're still there, listening." Michael dismissed it with a polite nod, attributing her warning to local superstition. But Clara's eyes followed him with concern long after he had turned away. Later that evening, armed with a flashlight, camera, and notebook, Michael made his way to the plateau just north of the Pueblo. This was the rumored site of the final clash between Spanish colonists and Pueblo warriors, where blood ran thick into the dust. The air grew colder as he walked. It wasn't just a drop in temperature. It was something heavier, like a pressure that settled in his chest. The breeze, once soft, now howled between the brush like distant screams. He clicked on his recorder, standing at the edge of the Taos Plateau. The land is unnaturally still. "I feel." A rustle interrupted him. He swung his flashlight around, catching only sagebrush and a cloud of dust. But then he heard it drumming, faint, rhythmic, steady. No ceremonial dance was happening at this hour, not in the middle of nowhere. Then came the voices, low chanting, ancient. The words were not English, not Spanish. They were deeper, older. Michael's breath caught in his throat as he turned toward the sound. There, between two juniper trees, a pale figure stood, barefoot, cloaked in what looked like elk hide, and wearing a broken war mask. Its eyes glowed faintly, not from within, but as if reflecting a fire that wasn't there. He raised his camera. Nothing appeared in the lens, but when he lowered it, the figure was closer. He took a step back and nearly stumbled. All around him, the air filled with phantom drums and whispered chants. A chorus of warriors, lamenting, warning, and then a woman's voice, soft, sorrowful, spoke his name. "Michael, why do you disturb us?" His mouth went dry. "Who are you?" The wind answered, swirling dust around his feet. He turned to run, but the landscape twisted. What had once been desert was now a blurred battlefield. Ghostly figures clashed in silent violence, their weapons striking without sound, their mouths open in screams that could not be heard. He saw smoke, fire, and the bodies of fallen warriors, only to blink and find himself back in silence. He ran without direction until he collapsed just outside the bed and breakfast. Clara was waiting on the porch, holding a single white feather in her hand. She placed it on his chest. "You saw them," she said. It was not a question. Michael nodded, tears in his eyes. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know. They are not angry, but they remember. This land holds memory like we hold breath, tight and with pain." The next morning, Michael tried to leave Taos, but something stopped him halfway out of town. A pull, as if the spirits had left something inside him. He returned to the plateau once more, this time without equipment. He brought tobacco, placed it on the ground, and whispered a prayer. The wind was calm that night. No drums, no voices, just peace. But still, every few weeks, visitors speak of the chill that runs down their spine as they cross the same plateau. They hear the chant, see the figures in the distance. Taos does not forget, and neither does the land. Let's get to part 2 of the story, Whispers Through the Walls. The haunted house in Santa Fe. Tucked at the end of an old cobblestone road in the heart of Santa Fe, New Mexico, stood a grand adobe mansion, withered by time, yet regal in its silence. Its faded ochre walls and wrought iron balconies whispered of a former elegance, a bygone era when wealth and power danced behind its heavy wooden doors. But the house had not been lived in for decades. No children played in the garden. No guests arrived at the front gate. And yet, neighbors swore the lights flickered on at night, and shadows crossed behind the windows where no one should be. The house once belonged to the De La Cruz family, one of the wealthiest in Santa Fe in the early 1900s. The matriarch, Dona Isabella de la Cruz, was known both for her grace and for her ruthless grip on the family fortune. After her husband died under strange circumstances, some said illness, others whispered poison, Isabella lived in the mansion alone, with only a few servants. Then, one winter evening in 1936, she was found dead in her study, slumped over her desk, her fingers still clinging to a half-written letter. No autopsy was ever released. The house was locked, abandoned by the remaining family members, and left to decay. Nearly a century passed. In 2023, an architectural historian named Leah Ramirez decided to investigate the property for a book. She was writing about historic homes in New Mexico. Despite warnings from locals, she arranged for a special permit and stepped into the house for the first time in over 80 years. The air inside was thick, musty with age, yet touched with the faint scent of roses. The furniture had been covered in white cloth, some of it molded, some torn. The chandelier above the grand foyer still hung, though its crystals were dulled with dust. Leah walked through the rooms with her camera and notebook. In the dining room, she noticed the old silverware set was still laid out, as if dinner had been interrupted. A single glass set at the head of the table, cracked, with dried red stains near its base. She moved to the study, where Isabella had died. The desk was untouched, the inkwell dry. But what truly caught her attention was a portrait above the fireplace. A striking woman in black, with fierce eyes and a mournful expression. It bore no nameplate, but Leah knew it had to be Isabella. As she stood there, scribbling notes, the room grew colder. The air shifted, as if someone had entered behind her. She turned. Nothing. That night, she stayed at a nearby inn. Around 2:17 a.m., Leah awoke to the sound of soft footsteps in her room. She flicked on the light, empty. But her recorder, which she had accidentally left running in her bag, later played something chilling. A woman's whisper, slow and deliberate. "Don't take what isn't yours." Leah returned to the house the next day, drawn back despite the warning. As she entered, she found the door to the study already open. The portrait was different. Isabella's eyes, previously mournful, now seemed angry, as if following her. On the desk, the faded letter Isabella had been writing now bore a single fresh ink line. "I see you." Leah backed out of the room. She tried to leave the house, but the front door, unlocked minutes earlier, refused to budge. The temperature dropped sharply. Glass shattered in the dining room. She ran upstairs, seeking another exit. As she passed each mirror in the hallway, her reflection didn't follow her movements. In one, she caught the glimpse of a black-gloved hand resting on her shoulder, yet she was alone. She found an attic door and climbed through. Inside were dozens of old boxes, photographs, and something wrapped in velvet. Curiosity overcame fear. She unwrapped it, a journal. Isabella's. Its pages were filled with entries about betrayal, loneliness, and vengeance. One passage repeated again and again, "What is taken shall be reclaimed, even from the grave." Suddenly, a loud creak echoed behind her. She turned to see the attic door swinging shut by itself. Darkness enveloped her. From below, she could hear the soft click of heels on the floorboards. Deliberate, slow, climbing the stairs. She pressed herself into a corner, heart pounding. A shadow passed under the attic door. Then silence. When Leah finally escaped the house at dawn, her eyes were bloodshot and her skin ice cold. She never spoke publicly of what happened in the attic, only that she abandoned her project and left Santa Fe within the week. The mansion remains vacant to this day. Local children dare each other to approach its rusted gate, and some swear that if you look up at the second-floor window after dark, you'll see a woman in black, standing motionless, watching. Others say they've heard the sounds of typing from within the house, though no one has been inside for years, and some brave souls who've stepped onto the porch say the door opens by itself, as if inviting them in. But no one ever stays long. Let's get to part 3 of the story, Devil's Palace of Kings. In the heart of old New Mexico stands a weathered but majestic building known to locals simply as El Palacio de los Reyes, the Palace of Kings. Once the residence of Spanish governors and noblemen during the colonial era, the palace now serves as a museum, filled with artifacts from centuries past. But there are parts of this grand structure that no tour guide will take you through. Rooms that remain locked, corridors where the air is always cold, and windows behind which figures are often seen moving, even when no living soul is inside. The locals have their stories, passed down from generation to generation, of strange happenings within the ancient adobe walls. They say that some nights, after the last tourist has left and the staff has locked up, the palace awakens. Footsteps echo through the halls, light glows from behind shuttered windows, and the scent of old Spanish tobacco fills the air. The most persistent tale is that of Don Sebastián Alvarez, a Spanish noble who lived in the palace during the late 1700s. Known for his pride and cruelty, Don Sebastián ruled over his territory with an iron fist. He was feared more than he was respected. According to legend, he was betrayed by his own men, poisoned during a banquet in the palace's great hall. His body was never buried in consecrated ground. Some say that is why his spirit never left. In 2022, a young historian named Mateo Herrera was granted permission to spend several nights inside the palace to document the history of colonial architecture for his thesis. He brought with him recording equipment, infrared cameras, and a deep curiosity about the darker side of history. Locals warned him about the palace. He laughed it off. The first night passed quietly. Mateo noted the creaks in the floorboards and the subtle drafts through the ancient windows, but there was nothing unusual. It was on the second night that the palace began to whisper. At 2:14 a.m., while reviewing footage from earlier in the day, Mateo heard the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoing from a hallway outside the governor's chamber. Footsteps too heavy to be the settling of old wood. He opened the door and found the hallway empty. But the footsteps didn't stop. They were now behind him. He spun around, nothing. He checked the security footage. One of the cameras stationed in the main hallway showed a tall figure in an 18th century coat walking past, but the face was blurred, undefined, as though the lens couldn't focus on it. The next evening, while exploring the second floor, a level not open to tourists, Mateo discovered a room he hadn't seen on the original blueprints. It had no signage and was tucked behind an arched wooden door. Inside, everything was untouched. A red velvet chair, an old writing desk, and above the fireplace, a grand portrait of Don Sebastián himself. As Mateo approached the desk, the temperature plummeted. His breath misted in the air. And then a whisper. Intruso. Intruder. He turned, heart racing, but the room was empty. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him. Locked. Mateo banged against it, shouting, but no one responded. His flashlight flickered and died. The only light now came from the moon filtering through a small window, and in that dim light, the chair at the desk slowly turned. There was no one in it, but the air was thick with presence. Mateo remained trapped for nearly an hour before the door creaked open by itself. He fled the room, shaking, but his obsession only grew. He wanted to prove what he saw, wanted to capture it. That was his mistake. The next night, While walking past the great hall, he heard the distinct sound of music, a harpsichord playing faintly, as though coming from behind the walls. He followed the sound to a small stairwell that led to the palace's basement archives. The door was ajar. Inside, the lights flickered, and then he saw them. Dozens of translucent figures, dressed in regal Spanish attire, frozen in place as if caught mid-conversation. Some looked sad, others angry. One of them, a woman in a golden gown, turned toward him, her eyes hollow, and reached out. Mateo screamed and ran. As he did, he heard voices calling behind him in Spanish. "No Tiberius Haber Venito. You should not have come." He left the palace that night and never returned. Weeks later, when a team went to retrieve his equipment, they found something chilling on the audio recorder left in the governor's chamber. At exactly 3:33 a.m., a deep voice whispered, "La sangre on mancha estos muros." The blood still stains these walls. The recorder then emitted a sound that caused the technician who found it to faint, a high-pitched shriek, followed by a silence so intense it felt like gravity had been stripped from the room. Since then, reports from the palace have only grown more frequent. Tour guides say they often see shadowy figures in windows they know are inaccessible. Visitors complain of sudden nausea or overwhelming dread in specific rooms. One child on a school tour pointed up to the second floor and asked, "Who is that man in the red coat?" Though no one else saw anyone there, some believe Don Sebastian is still searching for vengeance. Others say the spirits of the palace are trapped in an eternal cycle, reliving the treachery and grief of their final days. Today, Palace of Kings remains open during daylight, but the upper floors and certain corridors remain closed to the public, not due to preservation concerns, as officials claim, but because those who've stayed there after dark have never been the same again. If you ever visit Santa Fe and feel a chill pass over you as you gaze upon the palace, don't look too long, for in its windows, the past still watches, and sometimes it sees you first. Let's get to part 4 of the spirits of the lost migrants in Albuquerque, New Mexico, a city nestled in the arid heart of the American Southwest, where crimson sunsets bleed across the sky and the land still hums with the memories of those who came before. Beneath the desert's beauty, however, lies a darker truth, one whispered in the dry winds that sweep through the dunes at night. It's the story of those who never made it, migrants who came searching for a better life and instead found only death, swallowed by the unforgiving sands. In the mid-1800s, waves of migrants passed through New Mexico, driven by hope, hunger, or desperation. They followed dusty trails by wagon or on foot, guided by stars and dreams. Albuquerque, even then, was a crossroads, an oasis for some, a final stop for others. Many never reached their destination. They disappeared during brutal sandstorms, buried beneath shifting dunes, their cries lost in the roar of wind and time. Families were separated, children vanished into the dust, and entire caravans were consumed in blinding storms that descended without warning. Their bones, if ever found, were bleached by the sun and long forgotten, but something of them remained. For those who live near the desert edges of Albuquerque, the nights are far from quiet. Locals speak of hearing faint voices on the wind, calls for help in languages long faded, whispers carried across miles of open terrain. Travelers who've taken the back roads after sundown report feeling watched. Others say they've seen shadowy figures standing alone in the desert, just beyond the reach of their headlights, vanishing when approached. The most notorious area is a stretch of desolate land east of the Rio Grande, known by the older generation as La Tierra de los Perdidos, the land of the lost. No signs mark it. It looks like any other patch of sand and scrub, but those who've lived here long enough know to stay away after dusk. A retired ranger named Elias Cordova remembers a story his grandfather told him. In the late 1930s, Elias's grandfather had been part of a relief team searching for a lost family who had taken the wrong path while heading toward Albuquerque. Days passed without a trace. Then, one night, a sandstorm rolled through. When it cleared, the team found a wagon, but no people. just faint footprints in the sand leading into the desert, which stopped abruptly, as if the people had vanished mid-step. And then, something stranger. Carved into the side of the wagon in jagged, desperate lettering were the words. They called our names in the wind. Elias's grandfather never spoke of that trip again. In more recent years, hikers and campers have reported strange encounters. One woman, Monica Reyes, described a chilling experience in 2017. She had been hiking just outside Albuquerque during a solo weekend retreat. Around midnight, she awoke in her tent to the sound of children laughing. Not playful laughter, but distant, hollow giggling that sent chills down her spine. She stepped outside to find the desert empty. But then, she saw small figures moving between the rocks, flickering in and out of view like mirages. She called out, but no one answered. Instead, she heard a voice behind her, close enough to feel the breath on her ear. "Are you lost too?" She turned. Nothing. She packed up her gear before dawn and left. She never went hiking alone again. But the most terrifying account came from a truck driver named Ramon Loya, who was making a late-night delivery through Albuquerque in 2019. As he approached a quiet stretch near the old Sandia foothills, his radio crackled with static. He slowed as the desert fog rolled in, a rare but possible occurrence during cool spring nights. Then, out of the mist, figures emerged. A line of people, men, women, and children, dressed in old, tattered clothes. Some wore wide-brimmed hats. Others carried bundles on their backs. But none looked up. They walked slowly across the road in front of his truck. Ramon hit the brakes, heart pounding. He waited, and as the last of the figures passed, one turned to face him. Its face was dry and hollow, as though carved from sand. Its eyes were dark voids, and its mouth moved. Ramon swears it said, "Find us." Then they were gone. No footprints, no sound, just silence. Since that night, Ramon has refused to drive that route after dark. Researchers have tried to explain the phenomena. Some suggest they're caused by temperature inversions, desert hallucinations, or echoes from long-forgotten memories embedded in the land. But those who've heard the voices or seen the shadows know better. These aren't dreams. They're remnants, fragments of people who were lost in fear, confusion, and despair. Spirits too restless to move on, bound to the land where their stories ended. The city of Albuquerque, for all its modern lights and paved roads, still sits atop layers of forgotten suffering. Beneath its neighborhoods and parks lie old trails where migrants once walked, starved, and prayed for mercy. Their pain lingers like smoke in the air. If you ever find yourself driving through Albuquerque late at night and the wind suddenly rises, listen closely. You may hear someone call your name, and if you do, don't answer, for it may not be the living who are speaking. Let's get to part 5 of the ghost of the hunter at Bosque del Apache. Bosque del Apache, a name that evokes beauty, silence, and the haunting call of migrating birds over a landscape untouched by time. But beyond its reputation as a haven for wildlife, this national refuge in southern New Mexico holds a far darker legacy. One whispered among hunters, passed from campfire to campfire, told in hushed voices beneath the canopy of stars. The story begins over 50 years ago, in the late autumn of 1971. His name was Clarence Yates, a seasoned hunter known throughout New Mexico for his skill and stubborn independence. Clarence wasn't the type to share space. He hunted alone, often venturing deeper into the reserve than most dared to go. Locals said he had a strange bond with the forest, as if he understood it better than people. But Clarence also had a reputation for breaking rules, hunting outside permitted zones, going in during restricted hours, and ignoring warnings. That season, he set out just before dusk, rifle over his shoulder, and never returned. The weather had been unusually cold, the marshes already crusted with thin ice. Search parties combed the woods for days. They found his camp, a dead fire, and a still warm pot of coffee. They found fresh boot prints leading into a dense area of cottonwoods, but they never found Clarence. Only his rifle was discovered days later, resting upright against a tree, as if he had simply set it down. The area where he vanished, an unmarked path past the southern wetlands, was quietly closed off not long after. Officials said it was due to preservation efforts, but the hunters knew better. They knew something had changed. It began with sounds. Hunters would report hearing another set of footsteps behind them, always perfectly paced, just a few yards back. But whenever they stopped and turned, no one was there. Others said they heard someone breathing near their tent at night, heavy and raspy, followed by the soft click of a rifle being cocked. Then came the sightings. One evening in the early 1980s, a hunter named Jorge Delgado spotted a man in a worn flannel coat standing between the reeds just before sunset. The man stared at him across the marsh with dark, empty eyes. Jorge lifted his hand to wave, but the figure vanished into the fog. Later, he swore he heard footsteps circling his camp all night, but never saw anyone approach. Jorge never hunted at Bosque again. By the mid-1990s, the story of the ghost hunter of Bosque del Apache had become a staple of local lore. Some believed Clarence had died of exposure or quicksand. Others claimed he had fallen victim to a wild animal. But many believed his soul lingered in the wetlands, tethered to the land by unfinished business, or perhaps by a rage that had festered in the cold silence of the woods. Some say he's angry. Others believe he's just lost. In 2003, two college students, Lisa Ng and Marcus Hale, were searching paranormal activity for a documentary. They camped overnight in the southern stretch of Bosque, equipped with cameras, recorders, and thermal sensors. That night, their equipment picked up faint movement in the trees, motion without heat signatures. At exactly 3:17 a.m., Marcus was awakened by what he thought was the sound of boots crunching frozen leaves. He turned on his camera. The footage shows only fog, but in the final 2 seconds, a tall figure appears in the background, just at the edge of visibility. A shadow of a man holding what looks like a rifle. When they reviewed the audio, they found something even more chilling. A low voice muttering just beneath the wind. "You're not supposed to be here." Lisa still keeps a freeze frame of that figure on her desk, though she refuses to go back. In the years since, rangers and visitors alike have spoken of the same phenomenon. Unexplained sounds, the sudden smell of gun oil or tobacco in the middle of the forest, sightings of a man who matches Clarence Yates' description. Some have even claimed to hear a whisper that seems to follow them for miles. "This is my land." But the most terrifying encounter came just last year. A father and son, Scott and Benjamin Harper, were deer hunting in the early hours before dawn. They just set up a blind near the old riverbed when Scott felt a sudden drop in temperature. Benjamin, only 14, nudged his father and pointed to the tree line. There, just beyond the shadow, was a figure standing motionless. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, his face obscured by dark stubble and shadow. He held a rifle in one hand and pointed with the other, directly at them. Scott shouted, but the man didn't move. Then, slowly, he turned and walked into the trees, his steps making no sound. The next day, Scott contacted the Park Service to report the incident. They told him no other hunters had permits for that area. In fact, no one had registered for a permit that entire week. The Harpers haven't returned since. No one knows exactly what Clarence wants. Some say he's guarding the land, protecting it from those who disrespect the rules. Others believe he's trapped, searching for something he lost in life, unable to cross over until it's found. A few say he doesn't even know he's dead, still roaming the woods as if he never left. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. When the sun dips below the cottonwoods and the winds rise through the marsh, Bosque del Apache becomes something else. The birds grow silent, the trails feel longer, and the air carries the weight of something old and watching. So if you ever find yourself in those woods, and you hear footsteps behind you when you know you're alone, don't turn around. Not unless you're ready to face whatever's waiting in the mist, because the hunter may still be hunting. Let's get to part 6 of the cursed grave at Taos Pueblo. They say the earth remembers, that it holds more than bones. It holds intent, secrets, rage. And in Taos Pueblo, where adobe walls bleed centuries of memory, there's a place where the land itself breathes with warning. The locals won't talk about it directly. They'll change the subject. They'll look away. But every child raised within the Pueblo knows. Never approach the mound near the old chapel ruins. Not after dusk, not ever alone, because that's where the grave lies, the one they say still watches. Long ago, before the Spanish arrived and before the missionaries built their churches upon sacred soil, there lived a Carina, a medicine man of fierce power and deeper silence. His name has been forgotten, or perhaps deliberately erased. Some say he was not merely a healer, but a protector of the veil between this world and what lies beyond. He warned of an approaching imbalance, of outsiders who would tear through the spiritual harmony of the land. When the colonizers came, bringing steel, plague, and prayer, they saw the Carina as a threat. One night, soldiers seized him during a ceremony and executed him near the chapel they were constructing, burying his body hastily and marking the site with nothing but a flat stone. But death did not silence him. Almost immediately, strange things began to happen. Workers building the chapel spoke of cold hands reaching from beneath the soil. Tools vanished or shattered. One man was found unconscious at dawn, his hair white and his mouth full of dirt. The elders of Taos Pueblo warned the colonists not to disturb the grave, but they laughed until a fire tore through the site, consuming only the chapel walls and leaving everything else untouched. From then on, the site was left alone. Years passed. The grave, surrounded by sagebrush and shadow, faded from memory for all but those who knew where to look. Yet even today, strange occurrences plague the area. Tourists wandering off marked paths report sudden nausea or overwhelming sorrow. Cameras fail, compasses spin wildly, and some, though not many, have returned with stories they refuse to repeat, speaking only of dreams filled with ash, fire, and a figure watching from behind the veil of smoke. In 1993, a university professor, Dr. Helen Brower, came to study the intersection of native burial customs and electromagnetic disturbances. She had heard the legends and dismissed them as folklore. With a small team, she camped near the site and used ground-penetrating radar to scan the area. On the second night, her assistant woke screaming, claiming he saw a man standing at the edge of the fire who didn't cast a shadow. Their camp was destroyed by morning, tents slashed, equipment soaked. When they reviewed the recordings, one file had a distorted voice repeating in a deep whisper, "Return what you took." They had taken nothing, or so they thought. Dr. Brower never returned to Taos. Local accounts grew more urgent in the 2000s. A group of teens dared one another to place a hand on the grave at midnight. One collapsed immediately. The others dragged him home, but he was never the same. Silent for months, drawing spirals and eyes on every surface, repeating a single phrase, "He lives in the dirt." He later took his own life in the early hours of a winter morning. Those who live nearby claim the soil around the grave never settles. It pulses slightly, like something beneath is stirring. Animals won't go near it. Not even the wind seems to touch the space directly above the stone. One elder, speaking anonymously, said this: "The spirits of those taken from the land, they cry for balance. But this one, he was taken violently, buried in contempt, and now he waits, because the world hasn't yet paid for what it owes." In 2017, a spiritual investigator named Carlos Medina visited Taos Pueblo with permission from a tribal liaison. He planned to meditate near the site, offering respect and ritual, to see if the presence would reveal itself. On the third night, he lit sacred herbs and sat cross-legged by the grave. What happened next remains unclear. His equipment shut down. The air grew so dense that witnesses nearby said it looked like the trees themselves were bending away from the grave. Medina was found in a trance, muttering in a language no one recognized, later identified as an archaic Tewa dialect. When he finally woke, he wept, and left that same morning without a word. Today, the site is unofficially marked by 3 stones placed in a triangle. It isn't on any map. Locals will not guide you. Even mentioning it is considered inviting misfortune. But people still come, drawn by the thrill, the legend, the challenge, and some don't leave the same. Visitors report recurring nightmares of being pulled into the ground, of dirt pouring into their mouths, of chanting in their ears. One woman claimed her fingers burned whenever she touched soil after her visit. Another man developed an irrational fear of burial, insisting he be cremated when he died. The grave has become more than a resting place. It is a wound, a scar on the skin of the land that will not close. So if you ever visit Taos Pueblo, stay on the path. Show respect. Listen when the wind grows quiet. And if you feel drawn to a place where the sage grows in perfect circles, where birds refuse to land and the sun casts no shadow, turn back. The earth remembers, and sometimes it does not forgive. Let's get to part 7 of the haunted shack at Chaco Canyon. The desert has a way of holding onto its past. Windswept sandstone, ancient petroglyphs, and the ruins of civilizations long gone whisper to those who are quiet enough to listen. Chaco Canyon, nestled deep within the New Mexico wilderness, is one such place, a sacred center of the ancestral Puebloans. Their great houses and ceremonial kivas still standing as testaments to a people who thrived 1,000 years ago. But not all of Chaco Canyon's past is buried. Some say it lingers. There is a small wooden shack on the outer edge of the canyon, hidden just beyond the trail where tourists stop. No official map marks it. Park rangers deny it exists. But those who have stumbled upon it, whether by accident or by something pulling them toward it, never forget it. The shack is old, much too old. Built sometime in the early 1900s, historians speculate it once belonged to an amateur archaeologist named William Henry Krause. Obsessed with the ruins of Chaco, Krause believed the site held more than historical value. He was convinced it was a portal, an energy nexus where spiritual and physical worlds blurred. He built the shack as a base for his studies, though few details survive about what he actually did there. Krause disappeared in the winter of 1911. No body was ever found. Only his journal, partially buried in the sand near the shack, offered a clue. Its final entry was a single, hurried sentence scrawled in charcoal. They are awake beneath the stones. The shack has remained untouched ever since. Visitors who claim to have found it describe the same chilling details. The door swings open at a touch, despite there being no breeze. Inside, the walls are etched with symbols, some Puebloan, others unrecognizable. Bones of small animals are arranged in strange patterns. And most disturbing of all, an old lantern sits on the floor. Every person who's seen it swears it was lit, casting a dim, flickering glow, though no matches or fuel are ever found. In 1998, 2 hikers from Arizona vanished while exploring an unmarked path. Their GPS logs, later recovered, showed their last known location near the northeastern rim of Chaco Canyon, within 200 feet of where the shack supposedly stands. A search party combed the area for days, but found nothing but a scorched circle in the sand and 2 charred journals, fused shut by heat. Locals have their own stories. Navajo elders warn of Chindi, malevolent spirits of the unburied dead. They believe the canyon, while sacred, has been disturbed too many times, and that certain energies have awakened, especially near the shack. They speak of shadows that move against the direction of the sun, of whispers that slither beneath the wind, of dreams that draw outsiders deeper into the desert. In 2007, a paranormal research team led by Professor Daniel Morrissey camped at Chaco. Though skeptical of ghosts, Morrissey was fascinated by reports of electromagnetic anomalies near the shack. On the 3rd night, the team picked up rhythmic drumming sounds, despite being miles from any living soul. Then came the chanting, faint, in a language no one could place. Morrissey himself reported waking at 3:13 a.m., drenched in sweat, convinced someone had been standing at the foot of his sleeping bag. The next morning, they found dozens of handprints around their tents, child-sized, burned into the canvas as if seared by heat. They left that same day and never returned. In more recent years, strange recordings have surfaced online. Low-resolution videos of the shack taken at dusk. The footage is grainy, the sound warped, but always the same. The shack sits in silence, then the lantern flickers to life, and a shape, half seen, cloaked in shadow, appears briefly in the doorway. These videos are often deleted within days, Their posters citing unexplained computer failures or vivid, repeating nightmares. One Reddit user described their experience. I didn't believe it. Thought it was some creepypasta. I tracked the coordinates someone posted and found the shack. It was just like they said, empty, dark, cold. But then I saw footprints in sand. Fresh, leading inside. I followed. Stupid, I know. Inside, I swear I heard someone whisper my name. I ran. But the worst part? I never told anyone my real name online. Still don't know how they knew. Not all who encounter the shack leave with memories alone. Some experience what doctors call dissociative episodes, time loss, amnesia, or hallucinations that last for days. Others speak of seeing faces in mirrors that aren't their own, or dreams where they are buried beneath stone walls, watching through eyes not their own as the sky of stars spins in reverse. And some simply don't return at all. Despite the warnings, the mystery persists. The shack at Chaco Canyon has become a pilgrimage site for thrill seekers, ghost hunters, and the spiritually curious. But the canyon is vast. The trails twist like mazes. And the shack, if it exists at all, only seems to appear to those it chooses. Some say it's not a building at all, but a manifestation, an echo of something darker left behind when Krauss disturbed what was meant to stay buried. Others claim it is a door, a thin place where time folds, and the spirits of Chaco's forgotten dead reach out, not in rage, but in hunger. So if you ever hike the sacred paths of Chaco Canyon, watch the horizon closely. If you see a faint glow just beyond the rocks, resist the urge to follow. If you hear drumming after nightfall, turn back. And if you come across a shack that shouldn't be there, a shack with no reason to exist, with a lantern glowing from within, do not go inside, because something inside remembers you, and it has been waiting. Let's get to part 8 of the ghostly lights on Route 66. There's something about Route 66 that feels eternal. The iconic highway, once the lifeline of American road travel, stretches across deserts and ghost towns, carrying with it the weight of a bygone era. But in New Mexico, there's a stretch of Route 66 that locals no longer talk about casually. They call it the Flicker Path. And if you ever drive that stretch late at night, you might see the lights. They don't behave like headlights or flashlights. No, these lights dance, faint at first, barely visible on the horizon, then growing brighter, faster, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. Some are red, others white or blue, flickering erratically in midair, and then they vanish, just like that, gone without a trace. Those who've seen them say the lights appear suddenly, usually between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m., near an old, half-buried road sign that once pointed to a diner long since burned down. Some believe it's coincidence. Others know better. The legends begin with the crashes. Between 1954 and 1971, this lonely segment of Route 66 saw an unusually high number of accidents, single-car collisions, mysterious blowouts, vehicles that swerved for no reason, tumbling into ravines. Many of these wrecks shared a common detail. Drivers claimed, seconds before crashing, to have seen strange lights ahead, hovering just off the road, beckoning like lures. In 1962, a trucker named Mason Hall called an over CB radio, his voice trembling. "There's someone out here. Lights, they're floating, man, floating." His rig was later found overturned on a dry creek bed. Hall was never recovered. His passenger door hung open, his seatbelt unclipped. The ignition was still warm. In the dirt nearby were barefoot footprints leading toward the desert, and stopping abruptly mid-stride. No signs of struggle, no body, just vanished. Over the years, the lights became more than local folklore. State troopers filed official reports. A documentary crew attempted to film them in 1985, setting up equipment along the haunted stretch. They caught only static, and on the second night, their lead cameraman suffered a seizure after claiming he saw a face in the lights. He later described it, not a human face, but a melted distortion, eyes too far apart, mouth wide open in a silent scream. He left the project and never filmed again. Truckers, perhaps the most seasoned of all road travelers, began avoiding that part of Route 66 entirely. preferring longer detours to maintain peace of mind. But for some, especially newcomers or thrill seekers, the lights are a siren call. One such person was Amy Velasquez, a college student from Albuquerque. In 2010, she and her friends went ghost hunting, armed with cameras and bravado. They laughed, joked, and even documented their experience on a YouTube vlog, until the lights came. The last video entry is still online, heavily blurred and riddled with audio distortion. Amy is seen standing on the shoulder of the road, pointing excitedly at something off-screen. You guys see that? It's moving. It's not a car. Her friend zooms in. There's a flicker, white then blue, hovering over the desert brush. Then the camera jerks violently. Screams erupt. The final shot shows the lights rushing toward them, unnaturally fast. Amy was found wandering Route 66 hours later, barefoot, muttering a single phrase over and over. They weren't lights, they weren't lights. The others were never found. Some say the lights are the souls of those who died on Route 66, trapped in an endless cycle, trying to warn others. Others believe they are something older, predatory, using light the way an anglerfish uses its lure. A Navajo spiritual leader once explained that lights like these are not ghosts in the traditional sense, but echo spirits, entities that mimic human experiences without understanding them. They repeat the trauma of death again and again, drawing the living into their patterns in hopes of escape. In 2018, a retired police officer anonymously submitted his own story to a paranormal podcast. I saw them when I was still on the force. Responded to a call about stalled car on 66. Found the vehicle empty. No signs of damage. But I noticed something weird. My dashboard lights started flickering. Then I saw this glow on the horizon. It was like headlights, but vertical. I stepped out to look. That's when I heard a voice. It sounded like my daughter. Only problem was she died in a crash 2 years earlier. The officer never returned to that section of highway. He refused to give his name, but his story matched dozens of others. The lights are accompanied by sounds, voices of lost loved ones, crying children, familiar songs playing softly on radios that were never turned on. Some drivers describe a sudden drop in temperature, frost forming on the inside of their windshields, even in the middle of summer. Others report their cars dying abruptly, only to start again hours later without explanation. One woman claimed she saw her own reflection staring back at her from the passenger seat. Only it was older, distorted, mouth agape, as if screaming in silence. To this day, the highway patrol gets calls from drivers reporting the lights. Most are waved off. Fog, reflected headlights, static on the radio. But every now and then, something slips through. A whisper caught on dashcam. A shadow crossing the road with no source. And sometimes the vehicle is found abandoned, engine still running, doors wide open. No trace of the driver. So if you find yourself driving Route 66 late at night, especially near mile marker 239, keep your eyes on the road. Don't stop for strange lights. Don't follow flickers into the desert. And if you hear a voice calling your name from the dark, no matter how familiar it sounds, don't answer, because the highway remembers, and so do the dead. Let's get to part 9 of the ghost of the Spanish soldier on El Camino Real. There's a road in New Mexico that stretches across time itself. El Camino Real de Tierra Adentro, known simply as El Camino Real. This ancient path once connected Mexico City to the farthest outposts of Spain's colonial empire. It carried priests, settlers, traders, and soldiers. Today, parts of the old road are paved and modernized, but some stretches remain untouched, winding through barren desert and forgotten hillsides. And along these quieter, lonelier sections, travelers have encountered something they cannot explain. They say he appears just before dawn, when the night is at its darkest and the desert lies in stillness. A figure in armor, weather-worn and ancient, trudging slowly down the trail, musket slung over his back, face obscured beneath a dented Morian helmet. He doesn't speak. He doesn't react. But if you pass too close, you'll feel it. The icy sting of air long since dead. And if you stop to watch, you may witness something more unsettling. A flicker of torchlight that isn't there. A soft clink of metal on stone. The shuffle of boots long buried beneath the dust. It is the ghost of a Spanish soldier, and his story begins over 300 years ago. In the late 1600s, the Spanish crown sought to solidify its presence in the New World. Soldiers were sent north along El Camino Real to defend colonial outposts and subdue resistance. Among them was Captain Esteban de Montalvo, a devout man, fierce in battle, and feared by both friend and foe. Montalvo led his men through New Mexico, establishing forts and missions, clashing with native warriors, defending their homeland. One night, while crossing the high desert near what is now Socorro, his small company was ambushed. Accounts say it was swift and brutal, arrows in the dark, screams swallowed by the wind. They say Montalvo stood his ground until the last man fell. He died with sword drawn, eyes fixed westward toward home, but perhaps he never truly left. The first modern sighting came in 1910, when a rancher reported hearing marching footsteps outside his adobe home, boots on gravel, rhythmic and steady. He opened the door and saw nothing, but the sound continued for several minutes before fading into silence. Since then, reports have increased, especially from long-haul drivers, night hikers, and the occasional adventurous tourist. They all describe the same thing: a lone soldier in 17th century armor walking along El Camino Real, his eyes sunken, his expression sorrowful. Some say he's searching for his lost battalion. Others believe he's guarding something sacred. One woman, Maria Alvarez, had a chilling encounter in 1997. Her car broke down on a remote stretch near Jornada del Muerto, one of the most desolate parts of the trail. As she waited for a tow truck, she began to hear the unmistakable clinking of metal behind her car. When she turned around, she saw a figure, faint, translucent, watching her from the shadows. He wasn't threatening, she later said, but he looked sad, like he knew he didn't belong. The ghost vanished the moment headlights appeared down the road, but the chill remained in the air, and for weeks afterward, Maria would wake at night to the sound of marching outside her window, always heading north. In 2008, a paranormal research team visited a stretch of El Camino Real near Las Cruces. Using thermal imaging and audio sensors, they attempted to document the soldiers' presence. For hours, they found nothing, until just after 3 a.m., when one camera picked up a faint human shape walking through the desert scrub. No heat signature, no tracks, no explanation. Their audio recordings revealed something even more disturbing: a voice in Old Castilian Spanish, repeating the words, "Por el rey, por el alma," for the king, for the soul. One member of the team later described a personal experience. As they were packing up, he felt a sharp pain on his shoulder. When he removed his shirt, he found 3 deep scratches running diagonally across his back. No one had touched him. They left immediately and never returned. Local folklore offers many theories. Some say Captain Montalvo was cursed for the blood he spilled, doomed to walk the path of conquest for eternity. Others believe he is one of many souls trapped along El Camino Real, victims of violence, betrayal, or forgotten promises. There are whispers of entire phantom regiments seen on rare nights, marching in silence across the hills, only to vanish with the dawn. The land remembers, they say, and this road, older than memory, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, carries more than just history. It carries grief. Travelers who have encountered the soldier often report strange sensations afterward: electrical interference, vivid dreams of battles they've never read about, the sound of Spanish hymns playing faintly on radios that weren't turned on. Some have been found disoriented, walking the road as if in a trance, whispering words in a language they didn't know. If you ever find yourself driving alone on El Camino Real in the early hours of the morning, keep your windows closed and your eyes on the road. If you hear footsteps behind your car while you're parked, do not turn around. If you see a man in faded armor waving at you from the side of the road, do not stop, because the ghost of Captain Esteban de Montalvo is still out there, and he is not alone. Let's get to part 10 of the French house in Santa Fe. A haunting of the desolate home, nestled on the outskirts of Santa Fe, New Mexico, stands an old, weathered house with an unsettling reputation. Though it appears innocuous to the untrained eye, those who have ventured near it or even dared to step inside know its dark history all too well. For nearly 2 centuries, the house has stood abandoned, its once grand structure slowly crumbling into the desert floor. And yet, the tale of its haunting persists. This house, known by locals simply as the French House, dates back to the early 1800s when a French family first arrived in Santa Fe to settle. The family, led by a man named Pierre Lemoyne, had traveled across the Atlantic and then through the New World to establish a new life in the American Southwest. Little did they know, however, that the very land they had chosen to settle on harbored a dark and ancient force that would soon make itself known. Pierre and his family, his wife, Marguerite, and their 2 young children, Lucy and Henri, arrived in Santa Fe with high hopes. They were skilled tradespeople, artisans and masons, and the family was determined to build a future for themselves in the promising, if somewhat rugged, territory. They set to work quickly, constructing their house with the care and attention to detail that one might expect from a family eager to begin their new life. For the first few months, everything seemed perfect. The family was well received by the community, and their skills quickly earned them the respect of their neighbors. However, it wasn't long before strange occurrences began to disrupt the tranquility of their new home. At first, it was small things, objects that moved of their own accord, a door creaking open on its own, and whispers in the night that couldn't be explained. Pierre dismissed these as mere coincidence, the workings of a new house settling into its frame. But as time passed, the events grew more unsettling. One night, as Marguerite was tending to the hearth, she swore she saw the faint outline of a figure standing in the corner of the room. When she turned to confront it, there was nothing there, but the chill in the air lingered long after the figure disappeared. Henri, their youngest child, began to speak of an invisible friend who would visit him at night, a shadowy figure with glowing eyes who told him secrets of the desert. Soon, the entire family began to hear the eerie sound of footsteps moving across the floors in the middle of the night, even when no one was there. At first, the family tried to ignore it, brushing it off as the house settling further. But then came the first truly terrifying experience. One evening, after dinner, the family went to bed as usual, but in the dead of night, they were awakened by the unmistakable sound of children crying, cries that echoed through the house, seeming to come from nowhere. When Pierre and Marguerite rushed into the children's room, they found both of them sound asleep, their faces peaceful and unaware of the disturbing sounds. The next day, the family discovered strange symbols etched into the wooden beams of the house, intricate, unfamiliar markings that neither Pierre nor Marguerite could explain. The symbols were not of any language they recognized, and they seemed to pulse with an energy that was both unsettling and hypnotic. As the days went on, these symbols multiplied, appearing on walls, in doorways, even on the furniture. The family grew increasingly terrified. Pierre, in desperation, turned to local religious leaders and spiritualists to help rid the house of whatever was haunting them. A series of rituals and exorcisms were performed, but nothing seemed to have any effect. The strange happenings continued, and the sense of dread that filled the house only grew. One night, during a particularly violent storm, the house was struck by lightning. Pierre, already on edge from the mounting disturbances, believed this was a sign that something darker was at play. The storm seemed to awaken something deep within the earth, and as the thunder rumbled across the sky, the family heard voices, low, guttural voices that seemed to call to them from within the walls themselves. It was as though the house was alive, its very bones speaking to them in a language no human could understand. That was the night Pierre and Marguerite made the decision to leave. They packed their belongings in haste, gathered their children, and fled the house they had once hoped would be their sanctuary. The family left Santa Fe and never returned. Since then, the house has remained abandoned, falling into disrepair. Many who have ventured near the place have reported hearing strange noises coming from within, the sounds of footsteps in the hallways, or the faint echo of a child's laugh in the wind. Some claim to have seen shadowy figures moving behind the windows, while others have felt a cold, oppressive presence that seems to follow them wherever they go. Locals tell tales of the house's curse, warning travelers to stay far away. They say the family spirits never left, their souls trapped within the house by the dark forces they could not escape. And sometimes, if you listen closely enough, you might hear Marguerite's voice calling out to her children, or Pierre's footsteps echoing in the hall, still searching for answers. A few daring souls have attempted to spend the night in the French house, hoping to uncover the secrets hidden within its walls. Most of them are never heard from again, their only trace being the faintest whisper in the wind as they vanish into the night. The French house stands now as a monument to the unknown, a place where the past and the present collide, and where the spirits of a family lost to time continue to haunt the land. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, one thing is certain. There is something in the French house, something that will not let go. And as long as it stands, the spirits of Pierre, Marguerite, Lucy, and Henri will linger, waiting for the day when someone dares to enter once again.